Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is an environmental activist and memoirist, Trish O'Kane. Miss O'Kane is a devoted birder, among other things, and explains how a proper relationship to the natural world can save, perhaps heal, the human world. Trish, it's nice to see you. The Honors College very graciously brings in a really interesting and entertaining speaker once a year, and they're kind enough to share that speaker with us. So what have you been doing for them? What will you be doing for them?
Well, thank you, Don. I'm really honored to be here, and because I lived in Alabama, as you know. This morning, I got to go birding with the Ollie class led by Dwight. I forget his last name, but he was fantastic. And then I met with that Ollie class. I sat in the back. And then I went to an honors class, and it was just an open hour. Students asked me questions about the book. And I was being totally honest and sincere when I told the professor they're some of the best questions I've ever been asked. They were so incisive and smart. I really enjoyed the discussion.
That's great. That's great. Well, your life did take you for a while to Alabama, but it didn't start. You're not a child of the Confederacy at all. Southern California? Is
Yes.
that where you were?
Yes. My parents immigrated from Ireland to an orange ranch in Orange County, and I was born near that orange ranch. Yeah.
And was the outdoors important to you as a little girl?
Yes, because, I was growing up on the ranch, and it was in kind of the desert, hilly country when Orange County was really Orange County, right? Now it's Shopping Center County, but
Sure.
so yeah, we played outside. The ranch was about 100 acres, and it was, just like in Alabama, probably for you growing up, go outside and play and spend hours in the avocado groves or climbing the hills or in the canyon, and I was very lucky.
Not specifically birds, though, not yet.
No. I mean, there were lots of birds. There was California quail and owls, but I didn't notice it. It was just part of all the growing up outside.
Well, there's a chunk of your life, again, there are birds involved, but not at the center, where you were in Central America, in places like Guatemala, as a social justice reporter. What did you report on?
Yeah,
what were you doing?
I was a human rights investigative reporter. I was in Nicaragua 4 years, and then in Guatemala 6 years. I worked with the United Nations. There was a peace mission there, brokering the end of a 30-year civil war. My job was to go out and interview people about human rights violations, about what the Guatemalan military was doing, if they were trying to forcibly draft people still, or dragging people away and torturing them and disappearing them, which they did do. And part of our presence there was to deter them from doing that, sort of as a buffer. And I really loved the work. It was very powerful, and Guatemalans had already organized to defend themselves, the civil society, and I learned so much from how Central Americans were trying to change their own countries.
You write in this book about while you were in Central America, you did a lot of writing. And I didn't exactly understand, where did the writing that you did there go? Did it go to reports? Did it go to newspapers? Who published the stuff that you were doing during those 10 years?
All of the above. First of all, I did do a book before this one, and it's called Guatemala, The People, Place, and Culture. It's really sort of a summary of 500 years of history. Why Guatemala is in the state that it's in today. It's really about U.S. foreign policy, and that was published by a small outfit in London. But I wrote for years for Time magazine and for the San Francisco Chronicle. I was a stringer, and then I wrote for many, many small Catholic, Jesuit, my family's from a Catholic tradition, Jesuit publications. I wrote in Spanish. I published a lot in Spanish. I was hired by a Nicaraguan research center, an economic and social research center, a really prominent research center, right out of college. And part of my job was to translate economic studies into language people could really understand, like union organizers or
Good
teachers,
idea.
people who needed that information to organize and change their lives. Right. And, I was translating from Spanish into English. So all kinds of writing, but always investigative journalism, which is
Right.
one of my great passions.
Right. So the paycheck came from the social services, from the organizations that hired you.
Yes.
And then the writing just went anywhere that would do any good.
Yes. Yes, and I also worked for, it was called the Human Rights Group or something like that in D.C., and they would bring down Congress people and their aides to Central America, and I was hired a couple of times on really interesting trips where they met with the Salvadoran guerrilla leadership when they were brokering the peace process, and then they went to Guatemala to investigate a massacre. So I would act as interpreter, and then I acted as writing up their report that was presented in Congress to persuade the Bush administration to cancel military aid to Guatemala during a period of really terrible human rights abuses.
Right. Well, phase one, if that's phase one, ended, and you found yourself in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And with really atrocious timing.
It couldn't have been worse.
Couldn't have been worse.
It could not have been worse.
You were there, and Katrina struck, and that is it's a hard chapter to read.
Yep.
You moved into a house, you had all your belongings,
yep.
and it was all lost.
Yeah.
Just underwater, gone.
Yeah, after I turned that chapter into HarperCollins, my editor called me and she said, Sarah Murphy, she said, that's trauma writing that chapter, Trish. That was hard to read. And so it was a little softened, believe it or not much. Yes, it's indescribable. I tried to describe it, but now I see the scenes in North Carolina, and this is happening to people all over the world. We just don't hear about it. There is a Katrina every day.
Right.
So I put it helps me put what happened to us in that context, and we were very lucky and privileged to rebuild our lives and had some help. But yeah, it's like you die, that life is dead and it's gone, and another life begins. That's really what it felt like. It was like a death.
But at the end, or near the end of the chapter the section on Katrina, you're there, your house is in ruins, your belongings are ruined, and there's a bird, the Katrina bird, that attracts somehow or other. In the book, it seems to me that bird is almost the agent of a kind of transition in your life.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, Don. Well, it happened. So we weren't allowed back into New Orleans for 40 days because our neighborhood was in Lakeview, which unfortunately has a Lakeview, so it didn't do so well, right? So we weren't allowed in, and then when we were allowed in, we were only allowed in for a few hours, and we had to leave. You couldn't stay there. There was no place to stay. Everything was destroyed. The whole neighborhood was destroyed. So I went back a few months later to teach at Loyola, and it was that first morning you're talking about, my first morning back in post-Katrina New Orleans. I wake up, and that story's in the book. I wake up and I'm lying in bed the first morning thinking this is really weird because I'm in a new place. I'm renting a room in a house in another neighborhood because there was no place to stay, staying with a friend, and I listen like you're in a city and you expect to hear traffic, and I just hear silence. And I'm lying there, and it's like a weekday thinking, this is really sad. This is because so many people didn't come back and all these people died. And then I hear a clicking because I slept with the window open. And the clicking was, I look outside and it was a red bird. It was a red cardinal, of course, right? And I'd seen cardinals before. In Montgomery, there's lots of cardinals, and I'd lived in Alabama. But because it was after the hurricane and because the city was in ruins and stinky and so many people hadn't even been found yet, to see something so beautiful and alive, that was it. It was like, wow, look at that bird. What is that? It's so beautiful. You just like, you need to focus on something beautiful.
It was a therapy bird.
It was a therapy bird. Yes, it was.
And
Free
I
therapy
wondered,
bird.
I remember as I was reading along there, because I spent ages teaching American literature and some British as well, I wonder if you were thinking about the British romantics, like just say Wordsworth literally, or American romantics like Thoreau,
I love Thoreau.
I do too.
Yeah.
Who talk about the healing properties of nature, because it seems to me that nature, that red bird and the awakening that followed, was your psychotherapy for severe, or not severe, but real depression, anxiety. Is this? Did you have do you have a literary mind that way? Did you think that way, or was it directly to you and the bird and the tree across the street in the park?
You know, at that time I didn't. I mean, I love Thoreau, and I had to read Thoreau before, but I didn't think that way. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I just was so astonished, and also so like grabbing onto anything I could find that was beautiful and that could help me get through the day so I could go teach my students.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until really afterwards, and I started doing my PhD, reading literature on public health, and then thinking, and then realizing too, Dawn, like, I have to watch birds. I cannot live without birds. If I don't watch birds, you don't want to be around me. I mean, I start to get really screwed up. My brain does not work without the birds. They're my medicine. But it took me a little while for that. You know, I had to do it for a while and then realize, oh, I can't stop doing this.
Well, it's much more authentic the way you do it. I mean, somebody else might read Wordsworth and Thoreau and then decide they're going to go find therapy in nature.
Yeah, no.
But you responded out of need, you responded to the beauty, and then it changed your life without reading anything about it.
I just stumbled into it. I mean, the bird appeared, and then after that, it's like every time I saw a bird, I was looking for the birds.
I was amused. I'm not an Alabamian, actually. I'm a New Yorker. I've just been here a very long time. And I spent 6 years in Albany, New York, which is one of the coldest places in the world. So I was amused to read of your trepidation. You were accepted at a PhD program in Madison at the University of Wisconsin, and you thought, as I understood it, you thought, I'm not sure I want to live where it's so cold.
Yeah.
But you did. I mean, you adjusted. How did that work out?
Well, I deferred for a year. I did. When I got the acceptance, I was like, no, I cannot go to this place. It's too cold, really. I wanted to go to Chapel Hill, and they didn't accept me because of my stupid math score on the GRE. But I wanted to stay in the South, warm, right?
Sure.
But once I moved to Madison, you know, it was my father before he died. He died of cancer the year after Katrina. And of course, he was from Northern Ireland, very cold place. And he said, don't be afraid to go to Wisconsin. I was like, Dad, we grew up, all you talked about was how cold and awful Ireland was, and the snow and your wet feet. And of course, I'm terrified of the snow. He's like, don't be afraid. Go to Wisconsin. Go to Wisconsin. It was fantastic. I love it. And now I love winter. And Vermont is equally as wonderful. So I love winter.
Oh,
but it took a little while. It wasn't right away.
You can wear more clothes and proper clothes. And if you're here and you're walking around and it's 97 degrees, you're just going to melt. And there's not much you can do about it. But you found and made a home and a career in Madison and at the university and at the Warner Park. Now, there are a lot of different things. I want to talk about the geese because I love the geese. But describe for viewers this mentoring invention that you created. You had college students you were a graduate student, they were undergraduates, most of them, right?
Yes, that's right, they were undergraduates.
But the people that they were dealing with then, the next step down, were middle schoolers?
Yes.
Tell me how that worked.
Yeah, so we moved to Madison so I could get the PhD in environmental studies. And I took ornithology, then really went off the deep end. And then I started birding in the park across the street from our house and learned there was a city plan to concretize that park and really tear up a lot of bird habitat. which was terrible because we just bought this little house right on the edge of the park, and I was really upset. So long story short, the children's program, I ended up creating a children's program for the kids that lived around that park. There were no environmental education programs in the park. The city councilor asked me to help while I was trying to fight the city plan, and I thought, you know what? The kids will be the best defenders of this park because they play in it and they love it. And if I can get them in there with college students learning stuff and people see that we're using the park for this really positive program, maybe they'll leave it alone and not cut all the trees down and stuff. And that's exactly what happened. So but the way it works is over time. I teach a class. Now I teach it at the University of Vermont, but I taught a class at University of Wisconsin. I trained like 20 college mentors, and every Wednesday took them to the middle school, paired them each with a child, and we walked a mile to the park and spent and it's still going on in Madison. I trained a replacement, and then I got offered a job in Vermont, and I do it in Burlington. My students will go out on Wednesday with their 25 children. They're each paired with the kid. And they play and walk together for 3 hours. They climb trees, they invent new worlds, they look at birds, but it's not all about the birds. It's about what that child is interested in, right? So it's driven by, we're not bird evangelists. I tell my students this. Some of them are bird evangelists. I say, no. It's what the kid is interested in. Listen to the child. And if it's video games, talk to them about video games. We're just getting them outside, doing something positive.
It's in the book, at different points in the book, there's a kind of lamentation about how people don't connect to the natural world. And you don't have to live in the Adirondacks to connect with the natural world. The park provided all real, tell me if this is right or wrong, but it seems like in your book, the park provides everything that the person needs if you could just get there and connect with it.
Yes, well, that's been amply documented by like a growing mountain of scientific studies that being outside in a green space, I mean, in Japan, it's part of the culture, forest bathing. They've studied how just walking through the woods lowers your blood pressure, decreases certain stress hormones, cortisol. There are doctors now in our country who are prescribing P for park. Park is medicine. So to go walking in a green space, it can heal you. It can heal you physically and mentally. England has a very advanced program. Hospitals work with their Audubon, which is called the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And they take patients who are recovering on nature walks and bird walks. So the hospitals work hand in hand with the bird organizations.
And of the birds, and one of the things, inevitably, when you're dealing with bird watchers or ornithologists, you always have numbers. There's always a count, different varieties of life lists and so on. But the bird at the center of your life at Warner Park was geese.
Yeah.
And it was, there's a sentence in there that says something like, I can't quote it, but it was something like, you had no idea how passionate people felt about geese. Some people loved geese and some people hated geese.
Yeah.
What is it about? And there is the singular really geese? Canada geese?
Yes,
you have a Canada geese?
That's the correct ornithological term. You know, I use the vernacular goose, but you're supposed to say Canada geese if you want to pass your ornithology exam, people.
What is it about them that makes everybody crazy?
That's a great question. They don't make everybody crazy. Aviation engineers have studied geese and how they fly in a V formation. The military studied geese and their flying formation and discovered that the reason they fly in that V is because they save up to 33% of their fuel. Because that head bird is blocking the draft for the rest of the birds, and so they can fly longer and they switch off. So if planes cross the Atlantic Ocean in a V formation, they would save up to a third of their fuel. So lots of people think geese are really cool, including me, and that they could teach us a lot. But the reason I think that people get crazy about them is because we mow lawns next to water, so geese eat grass, so we feed the geese. because of our sports fields and stuff. Then they come, and then we're mad that they come, even though we're feeding them technically, because of the way we manage the land. And then, of course, they poop on those sports fields, and then people get angry, which I understand if you're a soccer mom, you know, and your kid's coming home covered with geese poop and you have to wash it. That's awful. But it's not the geese fault, right? If you're feeding them. That's like saying, I don't want feral cats in my neighborhood, but I'm going to put out Purina every night with some, you know, bowls of milk. But why are those cats coming? It's management. It's how we manage land and water. That's the problem.
I had no idea. I mean, when you have too many geese, they wanted to have the roundup, which I thought was very amusing. In fact, at some point you parenthetically confessed that you thought the roundup was something Western. Actually, a goose roundup is they go out and kill them all.
Right. Yeah.
50 or 100 at a time. Well, you managed to prevent that, but the thing that you did, not you personally, but the humane way of controlling the geese population is to addle the eggs. And I promise you, I'd never heard that. You go around to the nests and you put mineral oil,
corn oil
on the eggs.
Yep.
Why don't they hatch?
Because the embryo can't breathe, it smothers them, and they die. But then you leave the eggs there, so the embryo dies, but the mother goose still thinks the eggs are there, no one has taken them, so she doesn't lay more eggs. But that nest, it doesn't work, it's a failed nest. And now birds are really smart, and geese are especially smart.
Yes.
And so if a nest doesn't work a few times, they'll say, this is not a good place to raise my family. I need to go somewhere else. And so it deters them.
I just, you know, in a lifetime of, well, not studying birds, but in a lifetime of learning things, I never heard about people addling eggs in the nest. It's a very
popular and commonly used method, and a group called Geese Peace,
right,
which I discovered and which has worked all over in several countries, not just here. That's their model, is to engage people in the solution. And part of the solution is citizen science and people addling the eggs and monitoring the numbers, not to get rid of all the geese, have some, but numbers that people are happier with.
Geese control. In the course of the book, and I read with a pencil like a lot of people.
I do too. Oh, all my books are
I learned
marked up.
a dozen different things about bird calls, about bird bones, about the nature of bird feathers, things I never knew, of course. But the one thing that it stuck in my mind, I wrote a little star next to it. Half of all birds die on migration?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Yes. And the numbers are going up. So, you know, migration for humans, for anyone, is dangerous because you're moving around, so there's going to be more risk. Birds have been making this journey from Latin America. By the way, Alabama is a very important staging ground for migration.
We go to Dauphin Island from time to time, and they land there in the millions.
Yeah. Right. So this is their gas station. They're feeding up before they're going to cross the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
And like a hummingbird in Alabama is going to double its weight and cross the Gulf of Mexico in an 18-hour flight without stopping. So Alabama is so important. But they die on migration because things happen, or they're too young, or they're inexperienced, they didn't get enough food. And now they die because of also cell towers and lights. Lights confuse their navigation systems because they're mostly flying at night. And they think those are the stars, or they get confused and they die, you know. So there's a lot of reasons. But it's a long journey. I mean, think of the birds have left Vermont, and many of them are here right now in Alabama, and they've already flown. However, 1,000, 2,000, how long it is. I don't know the exact number of miles.
1,300, maybe, something like that.
So they've already made that journey, and now they're going to cross an ocean.
Yucatan or Central America.
And that's why birds will have, 2, 3, well, they have 4 or 5 young. They just have to replace themselves.
I know,
first, right?
If they don't. I guess I knew, it may be, that pairs have 2 families.
Right. Oh, 2 broods. Yeah,
2 broods.
Families. Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, if 50% of birds die on migration,
they're replacing themselves.
You've really got to work at it.
They got to work at it. Yeah.
George Plimpton was once on this program, and George Plimpton was the unofficial honorary commissioner of fireworks for the city of New York.
Oh my God.
He loved them and he promoted them so much. Now, obviously, fireworks bad for birds, bad for parks, bad for the water,
Bad for humans.
bad for dogs' ears. So the question I actually wrote for you is, assuming that some people really love them, is there a way to have a 4th of July fireworks celebration that is relatively sane and safe?
Well, first of all, Don, I grew up loving fireworks too. I grew up in Southern California, 20 minutes from Disneyland. Every night in the summer, they were firing them off, and we watched them from a patio. My parents loved them too. So I didn't know what they were firing into the air, all the chemicals. I only learned of it. It's different to be living 20 minutes away to living right across the street.
Right.
So that park in Madison turned out to be the launching place of Rhythm and Booms, the largest fireworks show in the Midwest.
Rhythm and Booms.
We did not know we moved next to the largest fireworks show in the Midwest. We discovered it the first year. The real estate agent just forgot to mention that one. 100,000 people, and they blew up the wetland. And then I started doing the research. Yes, there is a way to answer your question. Disneyland does it. They have fireworks without perchlorates. Perchlorates are really the culprit. And military bases are trying to cut down on perchlorates because if they go into drinking water, they can cause thyroid cancer.
Right.
I mean, this has been documented. So the military is really ahead on controlling perchlorates. Disneyland followed, but a lot of people don't realize what perchlorates do. The other problem, though, is the noise. I really do not think, if it's only once a year, the problem is fireworks aren't once a year. They're not once a year. And the noise is really bad for us, too. It's bad for your health. It's the new smoking, noise pollution.
There may have been a time, well, there was a time. I mean, take Rachel Carson or Aldo Leopold or, I mean, anybody writing 20, 40, 50 years ago was a kind of voice in the wilderness. But these hurricanes and fires and the intensity of weather, this is an environmental awareness moment. I don't think there can be anybody at this moment, who doesn't understand that we are having a kind of a environmental crisis, and we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, you've got college students out working. You've got them mentoring middle school students who will love the park. You have some optimism?
I don't know if I would say optimism, because after going through Katrina, that was a real wake-up call. But I would say I have faith. And I think, living in Alabama, I learned so much. It was such an honor to live in Montgomery and work next to Martin Luther King's little tiny church, learn so much about that movement. And think about those people, those leaders, those black leaders from the 50s and 60s, and white people too who were part of it, and before. Were they optimistic when they were facing the Klan and getting beaten and hosed and all that in Birmingham and blown up? I don't know if they were optimistic, but they were thinking ahead of the next generation.
Right. So if you're not,
they didn't give up.
No, even if you're not optimistic, you're determined.
Well, we can't. It's not right. I mean, we brought children into the world. Are we just going to say, sorry, we screwed it up, it's your problem now? That's wrong. So no, not giving up. But I'm not optimistic. We need to make a radical turn real fast.
All right. Well, I hope people reading this book and watching this talk, I hope they'll put their paddle in the water.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for reading the book so attentively and deeply.